Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm David Westin. Welcome to Wall Street Week on Bloomberg Radio. Coming up on the program, we take a look at the growing investment opportunities in and around women's sports. Plus, we hear from Robby Starbuck, who's made news for his anti-DEI efforts on his activism and his push to advocate for values-based investing. First up, though, President Trump is in an escalating standoff with Harvard University after the government froze $2.2 billion in federal grants for the school this week. The president went on to threaten Harvard's tax-exempt status and on Wednesday accused the school of hiring radical left faculty and said it, quote, can no longer be considered even a decent place for learning. For more on this, we talked with former Harvard University president and Wall Street Week contributor Larry Summers, who applauded the university's effort to stand up to President Trump.
David, I've been sharply critical of Harvard, and I continue to be critical on many dimensions. Anti-Semitism is still not responded to strongly enough. There are still excesses of identity politics. There's still concerns about intellectual diversity. That's all right. But here's the thing. In America, you have to follow the law. And the approach the Trump administration is taking, it is not at all consistent with the Civil Rights Act. It is probably not consistent with Harvard's First Amendment rights. And so the right thing to do was surely for Harvard to respond vigorously and strongly. All the more because this is not an isolated thing, what's being done to Harvard. This is not a manifestation of a particular concern about aspects of universities. This is a part of a broad and sweeping effort to suppress institutions that challenge the presidential administration. It's part of what's being done to law firms. It's part of what's being done to countries. It's part of what's being done to judges. It's part of what's being done to legal residents of our country. And if an institution like Harvard cannot resist tyranny when applied to it, with Harvard's $50 billion endowment, with all its network, with all its prestige, then who can? So Harvard should not go interjecting itself into politics. But God, when it is the object of an extra-legal set of orders and threats, I don't think it had any viable choice at all but to respond strongly.
Larry, let's talk about that extra legal part of what you're saying. Elise Stefanik, the representative Republican from New York, saying, listen, colleges like Harvard don't have a right to money from the government. They don't have a right to taxpayer money. And if they don't have a right to the taxpayer money, can't the government put conditions on that money?
First of all, the money is not going, it's not like the government's funding the DEI office at Harvard. It's not like the government is funding the student discipline mechanism at Harvard. The government is funding researchers who are doing vitally important research on diseases like diabetes and cancer and ALS. So what sense does it make to cut their funding off because somebody doesn't like what the Associate Dean of Students did in a student discipline case? And what remit does the government have to set as a condition the composition, which beliefs are valued and which beliefs are not valued in the Harvard sociology department? That's not the way free speech works in a free society. And this is supposed to be done, the power of the purse, remember, by Congress. It is not the prerogative of the executive branch with 3 days notice, with no hearing, no judicial review, no transparent notification to Congress as mandated by statute, to simply indiscriminately start cutting off previously promised and committed funds because it has a disagreement over an issue with the university.
So Larry, give us a sense of what, as a practical matter, this will mean if it continues through. You ran Harvard at one point. You know the budget. You know that $53 billion endowment there. What will it do to their operations?
Look, they'll have to make some very important strategic choices. I hope that the university will find ways, even if there is a cutoff for some interval of funds, to maintain vitally important programs, to not cut back research. But potentially, if the U.S. government goes to war with our great universities, it means a sharp reduction in the kind of scientific progress that has caused the United States to be the envy of the world and pull so far ahead of Europe and Japan. It means the end of efforts at cures to diseases like cancer and diabetes. It means a substantial risk to our national security, because one of our great national assets has been our capacity for innovation, which resides very heavily in our leading academic institutions. So a short-run problem, I think that can be managed painfully until the judiciary steps in and does what's necessary. A long-run war against the universities, that is going after what is our hugest asset. If I think about all the different sectors of the economy, it's hard to think of one where we are as dominant as in higher education. All the students from all over the world, at least until this administration came, wanted to come to the United States. A vast fraction of the world's innovation takes place in American universities. If we put that at risk, we are making, I believe, a very, very grave mistake.
Larry,
yes, these issues should be pursued, right. But destroying medical research grants because you don't think people have been disciplined severely enough, it really doesn't make any sense.
Larry, I wonder if there's a cautionary tale here that maybe the higher education system has become too intertwined with the government. That's why they're so dependent upon them.
There may be questions that can be asked of that kind, but gosh, if the government is not prepared to fund basic research, the research which ultimately will make possible the development of new products, I think we have a problem. If the government is not prepared to fund scholarships that promote opportunity for our poorest students who are very able and generate social mobility, I think we have a problem. I think what we need, frankly, is a more mature relationship between the government, the broader society, and the universities. Mm-hmm. Yes, the universities have made some very serious mistakes. And yes, they should be pressured with escalating strength to change that. I didn't even have an objection to the way in which the Biden administration opened civil rights cases with respect to a variety of universities and anti-Semitism. But that's a very different thing than the kind of persecution that is involved here. Right. And this escalated, David, in a profoundly troubling way when the President of the United States endeavored by social media to engage in an individual specific tax matter, namely Harvard's 501c3 deduction, and to suggest that it be decided on the basis of a political ground. That's the kind of interference with the IRS that it's a sacred duty of the Treasury Secretary to resist. It's exactly what was alleged to have happened 6 levels down, and many people got very upset in connection with the so-called Lois Lerner case involving 501c3 deductions in conservative groups. Yeah. If there was punishment of conservative groups, people were absolutely right to have been hugely outraged about it during the Biden administration. I don't know anything about the merits of the case. But for the President of the United States to be calling for changing the tax status of his adversaries, this is new and I believe authoritarian and a real question about our democracy.
Larry, one last question. Since we're on taxes, and this is tax week, basically, what do you make of the actions that the Trump administration is taking with respect to the IRS?
I think it's possible that the Treasury Secretary and his senior colleagues are being seriously delinquent in their duty. I look at tens of thousands of people being pushed out of the IRS, even as tax compliance is a massive problem, and hear so many stories of increased tax cheating as a consequence. I see the elevation of a person with no experience, no administrative or information technology experience, to be the temporary commissioner of the IRS, chosen on the basis of political loyalty to the Trump enterprise. I look at what are probably the extra lawful agreements entered into without even speaking to people at the IRS with respect to information sharing and immigration. I look at the president's involvement in specific cases, and I see the most important line that I thought I was supposed to defend when I was Treasury Secretary: apolitical tax enforcement, neutral, professional tax enforcement, not driven by politics. And I see that line being crossed with the Treasury Department cheering it on. And it makes me both very sad and very angry.
That's former Treasury Secretary and former Harvard President Larry Summers. Coming up on Wall Street Week, will the money follow the momentum of women's sports? I'm David Westin, and this is Bloomberg. This is a story about perseverance and the women who are laying the foundation for what looks to be a huge investment opportunity: women's sports, where 2 of the fastest growing are the WNBA and the National Women's Soccer League.
And go in the box, in the corner! The league now double!
I think when you're looking at the women's sports space, specifically in the last 5 years, what you're seeing in the surge of growth really begins with consumers.
It wasn't really until the last 5 years that women's sports has had as much ability to be broadcast than ever before.
You're finally putting this product in the right spotlight, and it is exploding in popularity.
From tennis to volleyball to soccer to basketball, women are bringing it, both on and off the courts and the pitches, with women's sports sponsorships attracting over $1 billion, and total team valuations predicted to increase from $2.6 billion in 2023 to $4.3 billion in the next 3 years.
Number 1, go Liberty!
There is no question that women are fueling fandoms across stadiums, fields, and arenas. But is it sustainable?
Little by little, we've been able to see huge increases in viewership and investment. With that comes the investment that we're now seeing today, where people are really seeing more viewership, therefore more attendance, therefore more sponsorship, therefore more merchandise being sold. And that all leads to more external dollars coming into the ecosystem, saying, I believe that this is an economy that we can support and that also will have great returns.
Good morning. Hello. How are you? How are you doing? Thank you.
Thayer Lavielle is the executive vice president of Wasserman's The Collective, a women-focused global advisory business whose mission is to drive investment in women's professional sports.
The exciting part right now about women's sports is that we're seeing similar types of investors in women's sports, which means that women's sports has reached a point where true capital partners are coming in, looking at how can they invest in this nascent economy.
Women's sports might still be new on the scene, but they're growing fast. WNBA attendance almost doubled from 2023 to 2024. And in women's soccer, the 2024 final alone drew nearly 1 million viewers, nearly twice the audience as its men's counterpart. And the money is following the eyeballs, as media rights for the NWSL jumped from $1.5 million to $60 million in the most recent deal.
Left-footed serve! What a start for Angel City!
Given the numbers, it's no surprise that investors are paying attention, leading Lavielle to work with RBC to produce a study on the investment opportunities that women's sport provide.
We started this particular study with RBC, which is our second study with them, earlier in 2024, really wanted to look at the trends that we were seeing about how much money was starting to come into from an investment perspective. We were seeing an enormous amount of private equity coming in, different venture capital groups, individual family offices driving some real dollars into women's teams and leagues. And so we wanted to stop and think about, from an RBC wealth investor perspective, how these teams and leagues would prove to be really good investment for them. And so we set out to look at this specifically through NWSL and WNBA because they are the most mature leagues in the United States, and really looked at very specific variables, particularly the revenue drivers.
I mean, it's amazing to me that we've reached a point where this younger generation, this is their normal. Their normal is that female athletes are able to play in a stadium like this, sold out with an incredible amount of fans.
Chris and Angie Long are among those who have become investors, leading the group that bought the NWSL's Kansas City Current.
Give a full panoramic view. As more and more opportunities to watch women's sports have arisen, you've naturally now seen this massive growth in popularity, because at the end of the day, it's all about the product on the field. When you have a product that's as fantastic as women's sports, there's no doubt it's going to be successful.
We have been big sports fans. We actually were season ticket holders to a private professional women's team that was in Kansas City. And I think, our experience in 2019 being in Paris at the Women's World Cup really was enlightening to see the opportunity from an investment side, especially in light of the tremendous amount of global growth in the women's game.
In building their franchise in Kansas City, the Longs are focused on their brand.
One of the leading jersey sales.
And one of the things that has limited the growth of women's professional sports franchises, a dedicated place to practice and play.
This whole space is for the Kansas City Current. I think that alone is a big differentiator, because most other women's teams are playing in someone else's stadium. So they're relegated to a smaller space that might be more akin to a visitor's locker room. I think one of the things that is harder to put a value on, but incredibly important, is brand recognition. The first year that we had a team, it was a little bit like, oh, did you know there's a women's professional team in Kansas City now? To the point where we are now, where if we go somewhere and travel outside the country, people say, oh, Kansas City, isn't that the place that built the stadium for the women's team? And the first thing you see when you drive into this city is this stadium. There's not a person in Kansas City, the Midwest, and a lot of the country that doesn't know about the Kansas City Current and the stadium they play in.
I think from a revenue perspective, I'm unaware of another women's professional sports team globally that's done as much revenue as we did this past year, which, by the way, is only our 4th season in operation. So from a financial success standpoint, I think that speaks volumes.
From a revenue growth perspective, we're doing fantastic. I think it is north of a $20 million swing in revenue being in your own facilities. From a asset appreciation perspective, we're doing fantastic.
You look at what you can do in women's sports today, and the multiple invested capital versus the risk taken it's out of whack. It's absolutely in the investors' favor. And I think that's part of the reason you're seeing a lot more capital pour in, including private equity firms and these new sports funds, and all the things that are happening, I think, are due to the fact people are realizing, wow, if I'm going to take an illiquid asset investment like a sports team, I should get compensated for it. And there's no better game in town than what we're seeing on the women's side.
But there is another league taking women's sports to the next level, the WNBA. Since Caitlin Clark emerged as a budding superstar at the University of Iowa, women's basketball has skyrocketed, garnering the league more fans and opening up new markets.
We are the first expansion team since 2008. The last was Atlanta, and then following us, we have Portland and Toronto next year. So growth of WNBA has been a long time coming, and it's taken many years to get here. This building has actually always been here for the Golden State Warriors, and now it's our Valkyries Performance Center. So this is the area that, the championships were won before Chase Center was built.
As in Steph Curry?
As in Steph Curry, yeah, small name, right?
Yeah.
And now we've had an opportunity to make it our own.
Jess Smith was the head of revenue for the NWSL's Angels City Football Club, where she introduced new sponsorship models and broke records in attendance. She is now the president of the WNBA's Golden State Valkyries, the first expansion team in 17 years.
When you look back during COVID, the WNBA actually got together and played. They were the first league to do this. It was also a really key moment to where consumers were sitting at home on their couch looking for entertainment and tuning in, and really taking note of these incredible athletes, really taking note of what they were standing for when it came to social justice. And there was an unlock that began to happen with consumers and women's sports. So as consumers began to unlock giving those ratings, began to unlock buying merchandise, buying tickets, and understanding that their dollars in time and interest was driving the growth of the W, media listened, right? Teams listened, leagues listened, and more investment began to come in. And those consumers have really, really rewarded everyone in that circle that is equated to the growth.
When we talk about growth, how do you measure it? What are the metrics you pay attention to?
There's two things. One is money and revenue, right? Are your revenue lines growing? Are you investing in the right way to make sure that those are growing exponentially? And two is fandom. How many people are coming into your ecosystem through purchases, but also followership on social media or TV ratings? And so if you're looking at both of those, the growth is very significant, but we have a close eye on both every single day.
As fast as women's professional sports are growing, they still lag behind their male counterparts, at least for the most part. Where the NBA playoffs averaged 4.5 million TV viewers last year, the WNBA had 1.1 million. 22.5 million fans attended NBA games in person, where the WNBA had 2.4 million. But the gap is closing. Viewership numbers were up 139% for the women last year, but down 12% for the men.
You have a foundation in both men's and women's sports. From your experience, what's different about the two?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I've been asked it that way before. I would say the assumptions of things. In women's sports, it's been assumed that when you create a product, well, you better not lose any money. And it's just interesting the standard that has existed there. Before I joined Angel City, I was in certain rooms where organizations would think about, should we get a women's team? Should we explore this? And what was really interesting about the mindset there was that the conversation always came back to, well, if we sold 4,000 tickets, maybe we wouldn't lose money. Instead of, what would it take to sell this out? That advantageous opportunity to build a product and build a business and seek revenue and be relentless about it seemed to be lacking from my personal experience when having the ability to kind of compare the two and think of the rooms that I was in. At Angel City, what was beautiful about that experience was we had so many people from outside of sport really using sport as an opportunity to create a better tomorrow, but wanted to build a sports product because it was an untapped opportunity. How do we create the most robust partnership portfolio and assets? How do we have the best content? And then you saw the market respond. And now you've seen that effect globally, and certainly within the different leagues and teams, but that's only just getting started.
Only in the last 5 years have we been able to see more games online, more clanging of the drum for more viewership of all of these sports through both social media and through these athletes just having a bigger platform to say, hey, come and watch us.
Hey Fever fans, it's Caitlin Clark. I can't wait to get to Indianapolis. I know you guys are excited. I am too. Go Fever!
There's often been so many misconceptions about audience in women's sports. So long, people have said an NBA fan is a WNBA fan, and what we know about our consumers is that it really is for everyone. I don't know if you've seen the t-shirts that say everyone watches women's sports, and that statement is so powerful because it's true. The audience is actually pretty much 50% men and women. It's not a women's product for women. This is an incredible product for everybody.
Coming up, sports as an investment class. It's driven in part by the rapid growth of women's professional soccer and basketball. That's where we turn next on Wall Street Week. If the story of women's sports is one of dramatic growth, it comes against the backdrop of sports overall growing into a major asset class that has become an important alternative investment for many portfolios.
The rate of change has been pretty incredible.
Nicole Pullen-Ross leads sports and entertainment solutions in private wealth for Goldman Sachs.
Whether it is the growth in women's basketball, starting from college through the WNBA, or whether it's the valuations that we're seeing across various leagues, or whether there's the viewership that we're seeing, all of those things have converged in a way that has led our clients to think, I want to have exposure. I want to participate in this growth, both from a passion perspective, but also from a profitability perspective.
As big as investing in sports is today, it wasn't always that way. It grew out of agents representing athletes and the related businesses that grew around them. George Pine was one of those at the iconic IMG and watched the private equity business grow around it.
When you kind of take a step back and you look at sports, it's primarily been run by, governing bodies and families, and they were very conservative in the application of capital and the use of capital, and so therefore outside sources of capital didn't see this as a viable entry point. But as time has gone by and the media rights have increased in sports and the audience and the avidity of sports have increased, so has the value of the teams, so has the value of the industry, and so has the opportunities within the sport.
Early in my career, I was involved in one of the sort of archetypal sports businesses, IMG Worldwide. My mentor, Ted Forsman, acquired in the early part of the aughts.
Josh Empson is another IMG alum. He is now the new co-head of sports at investment and advisory firm Sixth Street, owner and investor in sports teams such as FC Barcelona, Real Madrid, and the San Antonio Spurs.
And the fascinating thing about the history of IMG is that the founder, Mark McCormick, was effectively the financial advisor for Arnold Palmer and then Jack Nicklaus. And as he looked at this, he realized that Palmer and Nicklaus were the value, not the league, not the tour that was organizing them. And McCormick realized and built that entire business, which became a multi-billion-dollar business, on the idea that they could be their own brand. They could bring the unique value to events. And I think that actually allowed, in some ways, gender parity at an earlier stage. And I think a lot of that is about the sponsorship ecosystem, right? That they didn't have to win just on the court for the purse. You could find someone, whoever was the charismatic number one in the world in either sport, could command a global audience for the period of their ascendancy and monetize it.
Sports and investing in sports have come a long way from the days of representing Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus in their size and scope, including geographic scope. Yield Street estimates the sports universe to be a $500 billion market worldwide, with revenue coming from media rights, ticket sales, licensing, and sponsorships.
So sports aggregates millions of people in a way that nothing else does. The Super Bowl had 126 million viewers. It's very few things in America that bring 126 million people together. And then you have people that are passionate, like Philadelphia Eagles fans. So you have big audiences in a world that's fragmenting, that zero in around something that they love and have a passion for. That's what makes sports unique. And then being more global. So for all of those reasons, sports is becoming more and more attractive, and it wasn't that complex or sophisticated 20 years ago in terms of capital markets.
It's bigger and broader, but what is it that investors are looking for when they seek to own a piece of the sports pie?
It really ranges. I would say some of our clients who are long-term investors in the space have been investing as a private family for generations. And those families have really leaned in mostly around passion. And we're seeing them look not only to the sport that they may have started with, but look at multiple sports, potentially in a same city or potentially across the world. And we see new investors who are trying to put a toe in the water. And they're doing that through some of the many growing number of private equity and institutional investors who have exposure to the space, or they're doing it through a minority interest.
It seems to me that owning a team might be a very different investment from having a minority interest in a team. Are they really different investment propositions?
They cost a lot more, that's for sure. The average NFL team, for example, when the CBA was signed, was worth $1.3 billion or something like that. Today, the average team is worth more than nearly 1.5 times that value. And so, although there's been a lot of growth of billionaires, that's a much smaller list today than it was 20 years ago. And so, when individuals are coming together to invest in this space, they're very much doing it in partnership. What they get for that investment varies significantly. It could be great seats, good parking, really increased engagement with the team. But in many cases, it's not control, it's not the ability to direct where the team is going. So there's a very big difference between majority shares and minority shares.
And it's not just team ownership, in whole or in part, that provides sports businesses to invest in. A host of ancillary businesses have grown up around teams that can provide attractive investment opportunities, which is at the center of Pine's private equity business.
There are different ways you can look at sports today. So the traditional has been investing in teams or leagues, which are very safe investments, typically illiquid and no longer holds, but have a certain return threshold. So we've invested in data companies, we've invested in webs, apps, and streamings. I own a company in Amsterdam that lights the pitch and creates a software so we can predict on the pitch or the field whether the moss is going to grow, what the conditions are. And as the media rights go up and the team valuations, the pitch is the quality of your product and the safety of product.
I think the revenue landscape and the diversity of revenue has certainly grown over the past several years. You talk to team owners about having the best experience for their clients and their players. And then there's everything around the stadium or the arena. The ability for investors to participate in the revenue in the surrounding area has certainly been important. We have seen a community impact. A lot of the owners with whom we work talk about their investment in their team as a community investment, a civic investment, because they are prominent players in the community.
But given the dramatic expansion and diversification in the sports business, is there a danger of dilution?
Typically, when I think about value, I think about supply and demand. But it seems like there is an unending new supply of sports. How can it be that the value keeps going up when there's more and more supply?
People are thirsting for great storylines, right? And of course, there are sports, Formula One. Think about UFC, didn't exist almost 20 years ago. Look how popular that is today. So there are sports that can break in ways that nobody ever envisioned. And of course, women's sports has attraction today that it's never had before.
Is expansion your enemy as an investor?
I think expansion is your enemy as an investor, but it's really more your opportunity. And that's because every time you expand, you light up fandom in a new market. Was Las Vegas a big hockey market before the Golden Knights? Probably not. Is Las Vegas or Nashville now a pretty enthusiastic hockey market? Yeah. If you look at the historical returns in sports, they've been surprisingly good. And some of that's been driven by scarcity, but not necessarily scarcity of franchises because all the leagues have expanded through this, but just a scarcity of other forms of content that are as engaging and energizing to such large fan bases.
Sports competes with every other investment opportunity, and its status as an alternative investment doesn't stop it from keeping up with the main asset classes. Sports franchise valuations have outpaced the S&P 500's returns, especially in the past decade. But sport is a very different beast in a very different jungle.
As we look at sports as an asset class, how does it differ from other alternative asset investing?
Nobody's ever asked me that. It's a great question. I think one thing that's really different about sports as an asset class versus other forms of alternatives is the multiple layers of partnership. So when you invest in a sports franchise in the US, you have a partner who's going to be the control owner. And that's a person who has needs and ambitions that you're trying to support. You also exist within the framework of a league that has very particular rules and has its objectives and its goals. And then beyond that, and most importantly, you have this universe of fans. And they care passionately about their team. And they are stakeholders in that equation just the way the league and the owner is. And there is that implicit compact that if you're coming in, you're going to make this better for them as well as for the league and the owners. And it's interesting to be in a dynamic where you have those multiple layers of stakeholders and you're trying to deliver value as an investor for all levels of that. And that feels pretty different from other forms of alternative investment. It's pretty satisfying when you get it right, but there's something special about investing in something that you can watch every Sunday, that you can come together with your family and sort of share what you're trying to do.
Alternative investing may be different when it's not your sports team. To what extent are your investors really looking for psychic benefits in addition to monetary benefits?
Yeah, it's an interesting part of the equation, right? So there is a joy element to the return that you can't necessarily quantify. And what we ask our clients to do is not just focus on the joy part of the return, but to think about the overall picture. And for some clients, that joy component is going to be at a higher on the list of things that are important in the return. And for others, for institutional investors, it's lower on the list. And so making sure that we're helping our clients think through how to set return expectations for themselves in terms of liquidity, et cetera, is something that we feel is our opportunity to do to help them navigate this space. Alternatives in general are an area of significant interest for our clients, and the type of exposure that they're interested in is quite broad. And so this is only a piece of that for most of our clients. For some, they really want to lean in and look at this as a primary investment.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This is Bloomberg. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.